How would you categorise Europe's reaction to the US and Israeli strikes on Iran? A confused mix of restrained condemnation and some reluctant support, perhaps. Not for the first time in modern history, Europe's key players are divided and, to some degree, scrambling to find the appropriate response to the actions of the US under the stewardship of Donald Trump. That's what we're going to be talking with our Brussels correspondent and NATO expert Terry Schultz about. Terry, I'll get back to you shortly after we get some context, after we hear from French President Emmanuel Macron, who announced by far the most muscular and proactive response. He says France's nuclear-powered aircraft carrier and its strike group will move into the Mediterranean. Their mission will be to support countries in the region targeted by Iran in retaliation for the Israeli and US strikes. Here he is justifying the move on French TV.
In addition to the assets already in place, fighter jets, anti-aircraft defence systems and airborne radar have been deployed in recent hours. We will continue with these efforts as needed. In light of this unstable situation and the uncertainty of the days ahead, I have ordered the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, along with its air assets and frigate escort, to head towards the Mediterranean.
Right, Terry Schultz, back with you. These are military assets that France is moving into the eastern Mediterranean. How much of a difference are they going to make to the war?
Well, Anthony, I don't think President Macron wants to make an offensive difference to the war. He says that he's making these moves in a defensive posture. You've seen the French base be attacked by drones, so France feels that its national interests are at stake here. But as he mentioned, he's moving radar, he's moving air defense, these kind of resources to the region. So he's certainly not saying that he's going to participate in the war on behalf of the U.S. and Israel. He did make a brief mention in that speech tonight that he does believe that the effort is not following international law, as we've also heard from other European leaders. But France does have air bases in the UAE, as I mentioned, and he says they also have defense agreements with Qatar, for example, with Kuwait and other partners in the region. So he wants to help defend them, and perhaps he hopes that by sending, as you say, the very muscular Charles de Gaulle nuclear-capable aircraft carrier to the region, perhaps he wants to give the impression that France could strike, but that's certainly not what Macron is planning to do at the moment if he doesn't have to.
Terry, stay with me as we try and wrap our heads around the European response here. As Monday, Macron warned that the war between the United States, Israel and Iran risks spilling over to Europe. He might best be ready for an incoming verbal barrage from Washington because the US president is unhappy at the level of support from some of his European partners. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is one of the main culprits, apparently. He did not allow the US to use British bases for the first wave of strikes against Iran. Starmer said the UK did not believe in regime change from the skies. That was his quote. And so Trump had this to say about the Prime Minister.
So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with. I will say the UK has been very, very uncooperative. And they ruin relationships. It's a shame.
So stern words, but Trump had even harsher things to say about Spain. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said the US strikes contributed to, quote, a more hostile and uncertain international order. He denied the US permission to use their jointly operated military bases, that being Spain and the US. And Trump was not happy about it.
I could tomorrow stop, or today, even better, stop everything having to do with Spain. All business having to do with Spain. I have the right to stop it. Embargoes, do anything I want with it. And we may do that with Spain. What do you think?
Well, sir, I think... All right, what do you think, Terry? We're back with you. Trump has slammed Starmer and he says he wants nothing now to do with Spain. How worried, I wonder, are European leaders about these statements coming out of the White House, Terry?
Well, you kind of have to unpack what's happening, Anthony. I mean, the conflict has already spread to Europe when you note that a base in Cyprus, the UK's base in Cyprus, has already been hit by a drone. So, this isn't far off to imagine that Europe's very vital interests are at stake here. But looking at the threats we see coming out of the White House, these are things that we've heard before from President Trump. And you've got to wonder why he's doing it again, attacking his allies at a time when there is such a critical conflict going on in the Middle East. But nonetheless, he said what he said. Spain has been in the firing line of President Trump before at the NATO summit last summer when it refused to agree to spend 5% of its GDP on defense. And President Trump mentioned that in the White House today. That's the first time that he threatened to cut off trade with Spain. But the Spanish government has already responded and said that, private businesses have the right to do what they want, and reminding President Trump that it's actually at a European Union level that trade deals are made with European countries. So he may have less maneuverability than he thinks he does when it comes to cutting off trade with a single European country.
So Starmer and Sanchez are the naughty boys. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz was in Washington today as well, at close range, if you like, and was praised by Trump for helping the US operation. What is Germany providing the US that Britain and Spain are not?
Well, we do know that some of the aircraft that were stationed in Spain, there are 2 bases there that the U.S. can operate out of, that more than a dozen aircraft were moved from Spain to Ramstein, this very large base in Germany. So we know that Chancellor Merz has said that the U.S. can use those bases for its operations in the Middle East. So that was something that President Trump mentioned. And Merz has been very careful not to directly criticize the U.S. actions. He is reluctant to say that he would support them. Many European leaders, as I said before, are uncomfortable with the fact that these operations may not be completely in accordance with international law. But Chancellor Merz has been pretty tight-lipped about that, and he was rewarded by Trump there as he sat in the White House today.
Terry, you referred a little to it. I think it's worth revisiting. Is anyone in Brussels worried that Europe could end up being pulled deeper into this war?
I think not just in Brussels, but in every European capital, because as you say, we have seen drone attacks hit bases in Cyprus. Whether or not that was intentional, who knows? But nonetheless, it did force a rethink on the part of European leaders about what role they will have to play. Now, many countries, of course, still have citizens in the region. They're working on evacuating them, but with airspace very dangerous, it's not easy to get planes in and planes out. So you've actually got European lives at stake on the ground there, and no guarantee that things are going to slow down in terms of the conflict. In fact, quite the contrary. So I think European leaders are very worried, and they have already been dragged in. You would not see the Charles de Gaulle steaming to the Mediterranean on a normal day. So certainly any resources that European countries have to send to defend their interests in this conflict are certainly, therefore, not available for guarding the homeland or for any other operations that NATO might need or the European Union might need. So certainly these are stretching European resources. And of course, people still think the worst days may be ahead.
He's stretching resources. And I also wonder if Trump wonders how he can regularly criticise his European allies and then expect them to support him unconditionally, Terry.
Well, he doesn't yet have unconditional support. As we've heard European leaders say that they would like their bases to be used primarily for defensive purposes or for humanitarian missions. But I think that if he does believe that, it's because European leaders have allowed him to believe that. He says terrible things about Europe, about NATO, about individual leaders or individual countries sometimes, and the Europeans simply don't have the backbone to stand up to him when he says those things. We've seen it time and again, especially when it comes to NATO, even when it comes to the EU. And so I think that he has learned that basically it's hard to get either 31 countries when it comes to NATO without the US or 27 EU countries to speak with one voice and stand up against the United States. And so he simply has gotten away with it for all this time. But we'll see whether that unconditional support is actually going to be forthcoming.
So we shall. Terry Schultz is our DW Brussels correspondent. We're very happy about that. It's great to tap into your experience as
Thank
Europe
you.
forms our response, or their response rather, to the US and Israeli strikes on Iran. Take care. Big thanks to Terry for answering our questions. What we would like even more is if you send us your questions. What do you think? Is President Trump right to be angry? Does Europe need to toughen up? Or do you want to shout out JD Vance because you think Europe is letting the US down? Please let us know down below. That means in the comments. Bye for now.